So we're live. Hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain that which is most logical and factual. So today I'm having Adam B. Coleman back to this conversation, back to the channel where we're going to be talking about the Twitter files, whether they are the smoking gun that right wingers or conservatives have been looking for, or whether they're just fluff. And we know that as soon as Elon Musk took over Twitter, there was some in conservative spaces that Elon, being the free speech advocate, would make the platform much more open to dialogue and free speech with defined it in the Jack Dorsey era. And so, in that line, Elon Musk, in conjunction with some journalists, including Matt Taibbi and Barry Weiss, released a series of internal Twitter documents in a 15-part thread detailing the dealings of with Twitter suppressing speech, colluding with the government, and some other not so nice things. So there's a lot to unpack from this 15-part thread series. But the question is this the smoking gun that conservatives need, or is this just a flaw? So Adam B. Coleman is here with me today for us to answer that question. So Adam, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, yeah. So first of all, maybe let's start with Twitter. Why is Twitter so important in political discourse? Why is it such an
Uh,
important space?
so the reason it's important is because it actually leads the conversation. So, so a lot of people like to say, well, was it Twitter has like 5% of the U.S. population or something relatively small. So why do we care about it? And it's because, and I think conservatives miss this point too when they start talking about social media and going to other platforms. Is that the most influential people are all on Twitter. That's that's why Twitter matters. Um, Twitter is Twitter. The ways Twitter is set up is it's set up by the most influential accounts start conversations, right? And then they continue conversations and promote certain conversations. Every so often, smaller accounts might have a viral tweet, right? But when we talk about consistent conversations, when we talk about what the other side is saying and then quote tweeting them and making fun of them or criticizing them, right? That starts a particular conversation. There's an entire, and I've done it too myself. There's an entire media ecosystem, especially for people who write articles, based off of what is happening on Twitter. And part of it is because Twitter has the most politically active people, I would say, out of all the social media platforms. So they're the most politically engaged, the most politically active, the most ideological. You name it, they're all there as well as far as like the base. But all the influential figures, like you can't go on Facebook and find out what some famous person is doing. It's not the right platform for it, or what they're thinking in a quick way. It's not really the right platform for it. Um, because Facebook is more for connecting with people in a different way, whereas Twitter is about I want to follow this person, I want to see exactly what they say, and you rank up from there. So it's a little bit more direct, and the people who are influential, it's more direct to get to their audience per se. So it's a little bit of a different thing, but that's why Twitter matters. Twitter matters because um, the most influential people help to set the dialogue in the political world. I say political world, but in the American political scheme. Um, and actually, to kind of go to what you were talking about, the Twitter files and stuff like that, the reason why it matters for people who are on the right is because when they're being censored, uh, or wrongfully being censored or being censored differently than people who are on the left, that alters the conversation as far as what's happening on the right or being able to express counter viewpoints and things like that. So the narrative is trending in one particular direction, whereas there's no balance between the two. And so you can't criticize the vaccine. You can't say these particular things. You can't go into different areas and have a counter viewpoint. So I think that's why it's really, really important because, for a lot of regular people, this is how they get their information. This is how they get their daily news, what's going on. And when they can't hear varying viewpoints, um, then that changes the conversation.
Mm. So I get the point that Twitter, people on Twitter sort of set the tone for certain political discourse or direction, right? Because there
Mhm.
are important voices in Twitter. But there is also this concept or this idea that Twitter is a private company, right? So
Mhm.
it can make up its rules, it can decide what voices to amplify or what voices to limit, right? So, in that sense, there are two competing viewpoints now. The viewpoint in that it's an important space for political discourse. So we want to have as much variety in terms of viewpoints being
Mhm.
represented there. On the other hand, it's a private company. It can do whatever the hell it wants. So in this sphere, what should take precedence?
Well, all right. So here's part of the problem. Part of the problem is actually when it comes down to that, we have in the Communications Act where it allows social media platforms, granted, social media wasn't really around when that came through, but basically it has provisioning because back then maybe you had forums, for example, where it allowed for people to or allowed for platforms to moderate. I can't remember the term, but it was something like egregious behavior, stuff like that, right? So if you're a car forum, you don't want people to just post spam stuff or porn and stuff like that. So it gives you provisioning to say if you are a forum, you can moderate accordingly and you can get rid of these things and you won't violate anything and you won't be listed as a publisher, right? Because when you're a publisher you have different standards, and what's been happening is while they are a private company they have certain provisions that they're allowed to get away with when it comes to moderation, but what they're doing is going past what those provisions were intended for, right? So when they're saying and we're not even going down to like legality. Obviously, if they want to get rid of like child porn and stuff like that, that one that's illegal. Two, that makes sense to get rid of. So we're not even talking about legalities or very obvious things. What we're talking about is this piece of information is misinformation. This piece of information um, is well, it's from that side, so we don't want it to come through. That's not what those provisions were intended for. And what's happening is one, they've abused it. Two, our federal government is inept. Half these people don't even know how email works. So we're expecting our government to come in and reinforce the rules of what it's intended for and punish um, platforms like Twitter or Facebook. Facebook is even worse, to be honest with you, but
Yep.
platforms like Twitter um, to to stay by the guidelines. But part of the reason they don't is because one, and no one wants to ever admit this, big tech donates to both sides. And so when you get donations and they hedge their bets in both parties, nothing ever gets done.
Mm.
And so we will continue to have the status quo. And I know, they're having these hearings, and I think the general public should hear these hearings for the people who aren't on Twitter to hear about the Twitter files. And because the media isn't generally covering Twitter files, because I think there is something there to discuss. So these hearings are good, but I mean, nothing's really going to come from it. I think that's ultimately going to be the end result of this. Nothing really is going to change or happen. Our federal government is bought, and whoever has the most money or whoever is a consistent donor will get their way. Um, so, as much as we're concerned about big tech and what they're doing and are they stepping over certain boundaries, in the end, punishment won't come their way. They'll get scolded, like they're getting
Mm.
scolded now, but that's about it.
Okay. So what is your take on the Twitter files itself? Like, can you give like a summary of what the Twitter files are and why they are important, right?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of Twitter. To be honest with you, I kind of zoned out after a while because there was just so much to kind of keep up with. I would say this: the most important part of the Twitter files, and this you can say is a legality issue. When the federal government comes in and especially the federal government and law enforcement comes in and says, "We want you to take these tweets down," and they say, "Sure, no problem." And not only that, they create an entire system where they input, essentially like a ticket or a request to take down these tweets. And then they say, sure, no problem, and just take down those tweets or ban this person. They do it. That is a violation of our speech. The government, just in general, the government shouldn't be coming in and telling us when we can and cannot say certain things. And so if we have a platform that is supposed to be acting as a not as a publisher, it's supposed to be somewhat acting like a town square. Its moderation practices shouldn't be governed by our government because we do have the freedom of speech. We do have the right to say whatever we want to say, whether it's horrible stuff or not. As long as we are not advocating for violence, we're allowed to say it. Or I'm sorry, inciting violence, we're allowed to say it. So if someone says that the vaccine will give you three heads, while that may be wrong, they're allowed to say these things. And the government is not allowed to say, take this person's speech away by banning them. We saw with Alex, I forgot his last name. He's a journalist. When
Alex
he
Jones?
started, what's that?
Is it Alex Jones?
No, he was like a New York Times journalist. I forgot his last name off the top of my head, but he he was banned, and he ended up suing Twitter, and I think they went into some sort of discovery as well to find emails in relation to what they were doing. And he was finally reinstated after like a year or so. But as a journalist, he was publishing actual information, things that he was discovering, and he was putting it on Twitter. And the government was coming in and saying, "You need to do something about this guy. He's ruffling too many feathers." And I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe it came directly from the White House when it was spoken about him. So you have the White House wanting to do information control about what a citizen, and not just a citizen, but a journalist, can and cannot say in a public forum. That to me is a gross violation of the Second Amendment.
Was that during the Trump era, Trump administration, or prior?
No, this was done actually. So this was done during the Biden administration, because I believe it was Biden's White House that was um, trying to censor this particular journalist.
So you believe that there should be absolutely no contact between the government, federal agencies in terms of direction with these private social media companies, that they should be allowed to run the show as they see fit within the ambit of the law. I mean, what about for national security purposes? Take January 6th, for example. Uh,
Mhm.
One cannot say directly you blame Trump for the events of January 6th, but him not conceding the election is would I would say contributed to the January 6th happening in the first place. Because if he had said, you know what, I accept the results of this election, I'm going to, step down and let the legal process continue, there would have been no basis for people to go to the Capitol Hill on January 6th to try to do whatever the hell they went there to do. So, in that sense, can't it be looked at, this is a national security issue, right? We have to do something. The laws that are provided for now may not be sufficient to, cover for this emergency situation. So we have to do something outside of the books. So in that sense, isn't it justified? I'm not saying that in all cases, but in that sense, isn't it justified that certain government agencies like the FBI or CIA will be having contacts with a platform as influential as Twitter for such things?
So, so here and here's part of the problem. for one, our Constitution is absolute, right? Um, so that's the first part is always that. The second part is what you're talking about is actually how it started. It started with the um, the FBI, the federal government, law enforcement wanting to have some sort of access to those platforms for investigations, for criminal activity, things of that nature. Sounds all well and good, but what ends up happening is that access, that power, because it is a level of power, to have direct contact to someone who will just take care of your request in a matter of minutes, to have that much access, it will be abused. And that's what ultimately happened. That's why we're even in this particular situation, even talking about it. So I don't even think that it started off with the intention of we're going to start censoring people's speech. I think it started off just like how anything else. Whenever there's some sort of new entity that has a lot of influence, the government wants to have some sort of involvement, let's just say, or wants to, they're curious about how this works. Hey, this seems very, very useful. How can we partner? Stuff like that. I suspect that that's what it's like in most industries, especially most industries of great power that exists in our country. But when it comes to something like, if you want to use January 6th as an example, I I personally have a problem with blaming, and this has nothing to do with Trump per se, but I have a problem with blaming a figurehead who's not calling for direct action for the actions of somebody who goes too far. So I'll give you an example. There was I'm going to mess up the timeline. I don't know if you remember when there was a crazy guy who shot up a bunch of congressmen on a baseball field. Do you remember that? It was quite a while ago. It was during
No,
Obama's administration, right?
no, no.
And that's another thing. The reason why it was kind of talked about for a week or two was because the guy was a Bernie supporter. So whatever Bernie had said in this crazy guy's mind, and who else he might have been listening to, that these Republicans are trying to do X, Y, and Z, was enough for this person to grab a gun and go to the baseball field and plan to shoot as many uh, as many politicians as possible. Um, and the fact that because I kind of remember it didn't really last that long in the news cycle. You would think, right? January 6th, they had hearings left and right, and no one from that particular side who was rushing the building had killed anybody. The only person who was killed was actually somebody who was inside the building. Um, but that's, to me, that's an interesting point that not a lot of people talk about that. Now, should we hold Bernie responsible because maybe Bernie possibly said something, or any other person that they were watching on TV? Should we hold them responsible for this crazy guy doing whatever he did? So, like for me, um, I see it like this. I don't know how many people. Let's say 200 people went into the Capitol. I have no idea what the amount is. Let's say 200 people went into the Capitol. There are millions upon millions of people who voted for Trump. Those other millions didn't come to the Capitol and rush it. You know, so what makes, you could argue, did Trump, everything that Trump did wasn't motivating enough for 20,000 people to rush the Capitol? You know, so why should we put all the accountability onto Trump? And we already know that Trump didn't directly advocate for people to even go inside the Capitol building. So I don't know. I'm always iffy on stuff like that, and no matter what political party they're on.
Okay. So we'll get back to the Twitter stuff in a bit, but I just wanted to, give a little pushback on the points you just made.
Mhm.
Now, I agree on the general premise that people cannot be held responsible for, the actions of others, right? So as long as someone has not directly called for something, anybody else acting on it, like saying I drew inspiration from this, it's not their responsibility. Words can be interpreted in a million
Right.
different ways, right? Now, but I think why January 6th was quite different, and this is talking from someone who, if was an American, may have even stormed the Capitol himself because I was pissed that Trump had lost. But looking at it from an objective position, right?
Mhm.
The reason, part of the reason I believe why that even took place in the first place is because somewhere in the recesses of these people's mind, they thought something else could be done for Trump to retain power. And if Trump had said, you know what, this is the process, this is the outcome of the election, I am going to accept it, even if there were some crazy people who thought, oh, there would be no basis for them. The guy you're fighting for has admitted that this, I'm done. I'm going to relinquish power, right? There will be no
Mhm.
basis for them doing that. But as at that point, he hadn't, right? So, in a way, like the Twitter guys were saying, he said Trump, they said Trump was going to just thread the line. He was going to thread the line. He was going to be just as provocative enough not to violate Twitter's policies. He was going to incite just as much not to violate any law. And is what people would, which I don't like that term, people would term whistleblowing, right?
Mhm.
Is like a dog whistle. I mean,
Oh,
not
dog
whistle,
whistling. Yeah.
a dog whistle, right? So you are sending out these subliminal messages. You're not saying it directly. No one can hold you for those words, right? But people understand the context in which you're saying it. So in that sense, I think that Trump bears some responsibility. I'm not to a criminal extent, not to the extent because those people who stormed the Capitol did it on their own, of their own free will. But there was a context for them doing that, and that was Trump not admitting or was not accepting the outcomes of the election as when he should have accepted it. And he had so much.
Okay.
There was so much time. I really wanted something substantial to come out from the Trump administration to show that the election was stolen. Yet nothing substantial came out. I mean, nothing. It's crazy.
So, and I could listen. I could take your premise there. If immediately he said, "All right, we're good," January 6th wouldn't have happened. So you're theoretically correct about that. The but the thing is, whether you're right about that or not, should we go to extra lengths to censor a sitting president? Because that's essentially what we're asking for, at least at that time. Should we ban him when, whether you like Trump or not, our president should have a method of speaking. And I believe it was established during Obama's administration that, yeah, the president is allowed to speak. And a matter of fact, I think it's presidential record when he tweets. So, that means something. And when you, at the time, he's still the president. Um, the inauguration didn't happen. When you go through that process of censoring the president, I kind of see it like if you can censor the president of the United States, you can censor anybody. Um, and I think that that action that ended up happening after January 6th, um, I think that was a dangerous precedent to do. Um, it doesn't mean I like everything that Trump says or think that everything he says is useful or anything like that. I just kind of I try to think of it from the sense, especially when it comes to speech. Um, would I want this done to me? Right? Is it fair? Is it a fair action? Because I see a lot of people who do this. They claim to be free speech, but when the negative thing happens to the people they don't like, they're like, "Yeah, exactly. That's yeah. Get rid of them." But when it comes back at them, now all of a sudden they're free speech. Um, and that's why I personally don't think most of the people who claim to be free speech these days have always been that way. It's just that the people who have a lot of control over speech these days are not on their side. Um, but when Elon comes into power and bans Antifa accounts, and I don't even know if it's rightfully so or unjustly, but the fact that it can be perceived as we got a new sheriff in town and he doesn't like what you have to say, so we're going to get rid of you, and they're clapping. I'm just like, you know, you guys aren't really free speech. You just don't like it when they tell you that you can't say what you want to say. So, communists get to have an opinion on Twitter too. You don't have to like it, but if you actually care about speech, if they can do it to your enemy, they can do it to you.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's one of the most important things that I've noticed on Twitter itself. People who are supposedly free speech absolutists, when it
Mhm.
comes to a point where there is a position that has been censored that they do not like, they're perfectly okay with it. They're perfectly fine that that position is being censored. But if it comes to a position that they like and is being censored, they make it about free speech. I think people
Yeah.
should just be honest enough to say that this isn't about free speech. I think that there is value in the position that I am pushing forward. So I believe it should be given more platform, right? Because if you want to say free speech, then you should allow everything. You should actually allow what you don't like, right? Because it's free speech as
Right.
long as it's not criminal, as long as it's not inciting to violence, as long as it's not illegal, right? It should be allowed. You don't have to agree with it. And there's an example that comes to mind of something that happened today. Or there was this guy, he's a comedian, this one young guy who did a comedy about J.K. Rowling's and the trans issue and all that. Now, a lot of
Mhm.
conservatives were just making a big issue out of it, right? Now, of course, the joke was, I found the joke funny, a little bit funny, right? I found the joke a little bit funny. Many conservatives did not find it funny. I didn't find it funny because I agreed with what he was saying. I just thought it was a good joke, and the way he used the things, sort of made sense to me. So I just laughed at it.
Mhm.
But conservatives were making a big issue out of a joke. The same people who would hold Dave Chappelle and say, "Oh, Dave Chappelle is the comedy goat for annoying trans people, right? With his
Mhm.
jokes and all that." Yet another joke, just because it's not pushing a position that you agree with, you could very well just pass on, right? You could just watch, oh, this is not funny, and move away. But people were literally making comments, people were making commentary, people were just up in arms over a joke. And I'm like, see, look at you guys. You are just as woke as the leftists that you criticize. You're just as thin-skinned and sensitive as they are, because you can't literally take a joke because it pokes fun at your side.
Right. So um, that kind of reminds me. I had tweeted out because I find this really annoying, so that's why I tweeted it. But I had tweeted out, um, stop saying that Trump is not a politician. When you're the president of the United States, you're a politician. Like, and I'm saying that as a literal definition. You can look it up in the dictionary. Politician has a meaning, and he fulfills that meaning. So stop saying he's not a politician. You could say that maybe in 2016 when he was running. And actually, when you're a candidate, you are automatically seen as a politician because you're doing political action to get elected. So even if he didn't win, he is now a politician by definition. But let's say after he wins, now he's the president. It doesn't get any more politician than that. So that's all I said. It wasn't a it wasn't a Trump is bad, or I wasn't giving
Or Trump
judgment
is
on
good.
Trump. Yeah, I was
You're just
none of
making
that.
a
And
statement.
I'm just making a statement. Like, stop saying that. Cause and there's a reason behind it, but like, stop saying this. And someone said, I'm unfollowing you now. I was just like, and I was like, man, snowflakes on every side. Like the idea that only one side is emotional. No, politics is personal to people, and you're a human being, so of course you have emotions when certain things are said. Um, like, yeah, when someone says something you like, you feel it. Yes, oh yeah, that's a feeling, right? We're not, conservatives aren't robots, you know, and no, we're not robots. We feel a particular way. Everybody feels a particular way. And yeah, there are some people who are very sensitive when you even just glaze the top of talking about their favorite person. Um, so like you said, it, there are snowflakes on every side, and everybody claims to have a particular position until that position is challenged, or until someone is someone someone on the opposite side, someone they disagree with, is experiencing the very thing that they were complaining about is happening to them, then
Mm-hmm.
they're all cheers for it. But I actually wanted to bring up, like, people who act outraged over every little thing, especially in a place like Twitter. I think those people are chaos agents most of the time. They're not here to provide anything of substance. They're not here to critique, right? Criticize ideas, or even just like mock certain things. Like, you can mock stuff, that's fine. You can make some jokes, but they're here to be outraged or to feign outrage over stuff that's like, I don't like it, but it's not even worth tweeting about. Like, just move on. Like, how many times I've come across stuff and I'm just like, I don't even agree with it, and I say nothing about it. I just move on. I'm not going to create outrage over something that's so minute. Like, it doesn't matter. And when I started noticing certain patterns that would happen, and I'm like, all of this is purposefully done. Like, it just feels like an entire industry. And right now I'm talking about on the right, but it feels like an entire industry that preys upon nihilism, right? And it preys upon outrage. And then there are very prominent figures who keep that machine going, right? Because it gives them more attention, more followers. Those followers translate into more subscriptions, more eyeballs, more dollars. Like, it's a machine. And so many people are so used to this. They're used to being in that environment of the sky is falling. Like, I can't tell you how many conservatives that I talk to where they're like, our country's in really bad shape. And I'm like, it really isn't. Like, there are things that are not good, but there's always things that are not good. Like, in the grand scheme of human history, we got it pretty good over here. In the grand scheme of present day, comparing to other countries, we have it pretty good going on over here. And this, like, nihilistic, fatalist kind of attitude that exists on the right is perpetuated by the most influential figures to make them think that the most fortunate country in the world is about to die any day now. Like, you guys are, because here's what happens. Someone on the opposite side, someone on the left says something, right? And then the right reacts to it and blows it up into being something as the second coming of this as an example that's happening everywhere, and the country's going to fall apart and everything's going to die. And then everybody eats that up, and all they're doing is eating up nihilism. And it's the same people where you're like, I'm over here trying to talk about strategy. I'm trying to talk about, here's how you approach things. Here's how you should see things in a political sense. And they're like, why bother? Because the election's rigged, the voting booths are rigged. And it's just like, you can't talk to these people. And at the same time, I understand why they think like that. Is because they literally have an entire industry that is built upon that. Now, on the left, it's a little bit different, but there were some aspects of that too. When Trump got into office, they played the same playbook. Remember, he was the next coming of Hitler. We're going to get into all these wars. They were saying that the voting booths were rigged, right? So, like, as I'm saying, the political ecosystem, especially for someone like myself who was on the left and now I'm on the right, theoretically, the political shift and all this stuff. So yes, I am now comfortably on the right, I guess. Um, and I'm just like, it's the same shit, different side. Like, it's the same on both sides. The left says we need to save democracy. The right says we need to save America. Like, everybody is playing the same psychological playbook, and no one realizes it. I joked about how it's hilarious to me that the right thinks that the left is in full cohesion and got their shit
Mm.
together. When I was on the left, they said we need to be more like the right because they're in full cohesion and got their shit together. And I'm just like, it's hilarious to me that no one
The
sees
grass
this.
is
No one
always
sees
greener on the other side.
the grass is always greener. Um, so it's yeah. I'm just kind of ranting, but yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah, you're right. See, for me, I am very, very disappointed with a lot of right wing figures, right?
Hmm.
Because I would say I would put myself on the right, but I've become so disappointed, especially on Twitter. Like this thing you just mentioned, where they've built up a whole industry on just this apocalyptic stance, right? The world is coming to an end. The world is coming to an end. We have to do something. We have to do something. Nothing actually gets done, but it generates clicks and views. It generates. You just seen some very stupid and dumb takes by supposedly smart people,
Hmm.
and I'm going to call one by name. I always call him out every time. Jordan Peterson, right? Who is just on Twitter behaving like a child, attacking everything, right? There's no dialogue there in what he says. It's just attack. It's just attack, attack. It's just apocalypse. The world is coming, Western civilization is coming to an end. You can't save Western civilization. If it actually is coming to an end, you cannot save it, right? So
Hmm.
I'm disappointed with a lot of right wing figures because they should know better. These are things that they've criticized the left for in the last maybe 5 to 10 years. But as soon as they find themselves in the same position, they have adopted all the same strategies. They've adopted everything. You're just going for shock value, right? So for
Yeah.
me, I keep saying that the left is delusional, really, actually, really delusional. For people who cannot tell what a man is from a woman, you are very, very delusional. But for the right, it's just stupidity, really, like really simple stuff, like really simple. I was watching a video a few years ago where talking about economics and the rest. So one white guy, they were asking him, we're talking about, okay, your CEO is earning this much, but you are doing this much as a floor worker, you do a lot of this job. Don't you think that the disparity between your pay is too much? The guy said no. He said that he's where he is because he's not smart enough. That he was as smart as a CEO, that he probably would be in a CEO's position. I was like, what a dumb thing to say, right? Yeah, being smart is part of the reasons why people are successful, but it's not the only reason, right? Your CEO may have been born into a much more wealthy family. He may have had more opportunities. He may have been to a better school. He may have had more influences, but to reduce your position relative to your CEO to just your intelligence was a really, really dumb thing to say. And those are the kind of
Well,
stupid things that
so
I
what you're
noticed.
saying is, what you're saying is he was right.
No, no, he's not
Because he
right.
said, I'm not as smart as the CEO. And you're like, that's a really dumb thing to say. It's like, well, there you go. You proved this
So
point.
in a roundabout way, yeah, he was right. Oh,
I'm sorry.
so
Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, so I really think that the right should get their shit together. Even this so-called civil war that is going on between the right-wing figures right now with Tim Cast and the Quartering, with the Daily Wire and Crowder. You can see, take for example the Daily Wire and Crowder. You can see how Crowder sort of misinterpreted what the Daily Wire was doing. He just blew it out of proportion. And I ask
Mhm.
myself, isn't this the same thing you are doing to the other side when you take their position, right? You sometimes mischaracterize it, and your audiences, they just lap it up because, well, we agree with you. They are not critical about it. They're not seeing it critically. That, are you actually representing what the side is saying appropriately? Are you giving them
Right.
due diligence before trying to take down their arguments, or are you just building straw men? And I saw it in that video. I was like, this is exactly what you do to the other side. Now you're
Right.
doing it to yourself, right? It doesn't make any
Right.
sense.
Yeah, exactly. The Steven Crowder thing, I never really talked about it publicly because I was going back and forth like, is it even important enough to like really get into publicly? Because it just feels like a spat between uh I don't know. It just seemed like a silly spat that was being blown out of proportion. But I will say I have like an allergic reaction to anybody who says they're going to save whatever it is, right? The single entity. I'm gonna save you from Big Con, because Big Con is all of a sudden bad, even though I've been employed by Big Con my entire career. Like there's something about it that I'm repelled by. I don't trust it. I don't trust anybody who does that. I don't trust any politician who does that. I don't trust any political figure, was it left or right. I don't trust it. To me, and I'm always looking for manipulation. To me, it feels like manipulation when you're like, oh, I just care about the people, and then the people, like, I didn't want to name anybody, as he's giving hints as to exactly who it is, or even for example, there's only a handful of companies that it could have been, less than a handful of companies that it could have been that he was even talking about. So Daily Wire comes out and says, here, we'll give you a breakdown of what that is, what the term sheet is, right? And he's saying, our expectation is that you negotiate with us, right? That's all it is. And he says, after that, and I watched the entire video, calmly done, rational. Okay, that makes sense. And he's explaining everything. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that could have easily been explained to Stephen Crowder. And then he says, I didn't want to do it, and brings out this recording of someone that he's known for a decade, that he was friendly with.
That was a dick move, really
It was
dick
a
move.
very dick move. It was a very dick move. And you know what's even worse? That it was a dick move. It proved nothing. It literally didn't help his case whatsoever. It just made him look like an asshole now, right? So he tried to get him on the term of salary slave or something like that. That's a term that, like, they're just on salary. What do you think that you're actually proving? You're not proving anything.
I mean,
Oh no, he
terms
called
were
them
so
wage slaves.
the
That's what it
terms
was.
were so generous. Like within 90 days, if you lose a sponsor, you have to get someone. I mean, that's full 3 months to get another sponsor before any deduction takes place. That's more than enough. What was he expecting, to just lose a sponsor and not fulfill the spot of the sponsor? After all, this is a business they were running. It's not a charity organization. So what was he talking about? And
Right.
for him to make it about the small guy, no, you wouldn't have come out if the monetary terms were favorable to you. We would never have said you were sticking up for the smaller guy. You were sticking up for young conservative voices who are coming up, who may be taking, who may become prey to such big conservatives. No, you went. It was simply about the money. It was the money first before he started seeing the other supposedly bad things that he was saying.
Right. And it's this idea. Actually, I think Stephen Crowder is a smart guy. And because of that, I don't actually think that he believes that, whether it's conservative or liberal or any political end, any media company operates off of pure ideology. Like, that's not going to happen. So why do we expect on the right that everybody is just going to say, you know what, damn profits, damn anything else, uh, we're just going to reach into the piggy bank and lose money left and right, um, because it's about the mission, right? It's about the mission. Like that's the framework that Crowder is trying to sell to the public. That the Daily Wire should be like F big tech, even though Google, YouTube is the most used search engine in the world, right? F big tech, F access to your videos, F all this stuff. And mind you, Stephen Crowder is still on YouTube, and he's on other platforms as well. So even he's not F big tech. Even he moderates his speech while he is on YouTube, which is a great strategy. Then you go into the pay subscriber to see what he really wants to say. That's a great strategy. So the strategy that he's already implementing for himself, he's criticizing the Daily Wire for wanting to use the same type of strategy. Because if you go and watch Ben Shapiro, he has if you want to see this, you pay for a subscription. Like, I like that's the thing to me. He wants everybody, and some people clearly did. He wants everybody to buy this idea that uh, using big tech is inherently bad because they're operated by progressives and the left and blah 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 blah. While he is currently using it, and then he wants them to guarantee tens of millions of dollars to him without a guarantee as far as the revenue source that it's coming from. So they're just supposed to be like, if they lose 40% of their revenue because of all this stuff, that they should just still pay you exactly what the contract said, even though by your actions it ended up losing money. Like, how are they supposed to keep paying you tens of millions of dollars? Like,
I think he was, I think he was being woke, because I think I can see the left doing that, losing money just to push an ideological position. I think the left actually does that. I mean, some of these companies are tanking their revenues for ideological positions. So, in a sense, the left doesn't really care so much about the profit motive. Like, they're like,
that's
oh,
kind of.
maybe we'll get the ROI later on. We're just investing now. They're ready to actually lose money. Many of these entertainment companies that are pushing the woke agenda, they're losing ratings, they're losing whatever the hell they're losing, but they're not backing down on pushing their ideological perspectives. And that is one fundamental difference I think I've seen between the left and the right. The right would want to monetize everything. The right wants to make everything about, capitalism, about business. We have to make money on this, right? The left is seeing it differently. The left is like, this matters more to me than money. So I'm ready to sink in millions of dollars into this, even if I'm not getting a return, just to push my ideological perspective. So in that sense, I think Crowder was being woke as hell. He was being a lefty in that regard. He wanted the Daily Wire to lose money just to push an ideological perspective. But if it was his own company, he would not be that woke. No, so you're trying to play as Milton Friedman would say that nobody does, as in, you can't do so much with someone else's money. I can't remember how much Milton Friedman used to say that thing. That basically the government, in terms of welfare and all that, using state funds is like using someone else's money. You will not be as prudent with someone else's funds as you would be as with your own funds, right? So that's exactly
Mhm.
what Stephen was just asking for in that deal.
So I will say this. I don't. I kind of disagree with your view of the left and losing money. I don't think they actually lose as much money as people want others to believe. I think there are some times when they do go woke and they go broke, theoretically. But I think that they truly believe that when they push certain things, that it's the new trend, and that so they're doing the thing that they believe gives them the attention. So like when Vice uh, when Vice writes an article talking about race and police brutality and all these different things and hit all these keywords, they can put it through the algorithm and get a lot of clicks, and then take that information and bring it over to investors. And the investors think, wow, there's a lot of traction. I've heard, I don't know how many times Tim Pool talk about um, the changes with the companies that he worked for, where all of a sudden they were like woke cells because they're looking at how much response they get when they go and talk about feminism, when they go and talk about these things in a particular way. And so they just like, well, we're all woke now. And so from a business standpoint for the investors, because the investors are the people that really matter and really dictate what's going on. From the investor standpoint, they're being sold that woke works. And I don't think the entirety of the media apparatus is as woke as people believe it is. I believe it's a financial structure that they think that people want. But trust and believe, like, I don't know, if the next trend comes along that they feel brings a better return on investment, and that it's the hit thing that everybody is talking about, they will switch and go over to that. So I don't I don't actually think that they're as ideological, at least in media, like in online media, as far as like articles and stuff like that, and even television. I don't think they're that ideological because I'm sorry, not that not driven off of ideology. I think they think that they're doing what actually people want to see. And here's the other problem with the media on the left: they're elitist, beyond elitist. So they think that everything that they do is is the right thing. They're so up there that they're so disconnected from regular people. And so that's actually their biggest problem, is their hubris. They think that this niche thing that is going around colleges, that coming in, all these 20 something year olds coming into the newsroom, and they're all in this, neo-Marxist framework. They think that that's, wow, that's the hip thing, and everybody's buying it, so we got to push it onto regular people. And regular people look at it as like, this is weird stuff. Like it doesn't make any sense. So I don't know. I think I like, for example, I know I'm talking a lot, but like CNN, when Trump was gone, that was their golden calf. Like, Trump's gone. Now what do you talk about? So then the media
They
empire
killed,
dies,
they
and now they're
killed the
forced to
golden
like,
goose.
yeah, they killed the golden goose. So now they're like, all right, so we got to restructure, and then CNN's for sale. So they're not as oblivious financially as people think they are. Like, they're just going to keep sinking money into something. There are a lot of hands that are at play, and there's a lot of investors. So yeah, I think everybody is in for business, but I just think that the left really believes that this particular ideology, especially in certain publications and a lot of publications on the left, um, is what is selling, and
Mm.
they're that's why they're going towards it. But trust me, as soon as they're not selling enough, they'll start laying off people. We're starting to see it now, and they'll eventually probably get it just before they go under.
So it seems that woke is a feature of capitalism then.
Yeah, yeah, that's what
Mm.
they call woke capitalism.
Mm.
That it is definitely a capitalistic aspect to it. That's the funny part. Um, when you put woke stuff on your goods to sell to the public, like, you are part of woke capitalism. They have ESG and all these different things to abide by as part of the capitalist model, right? So it, it's a whole big thing. But no, I don't. They're just like how Black Lives Matter are a bunch of capitalists pretending to be Marxists. Um, it's the same thing that we have fake Marxists over here.
Mm. Okay, so getting back to the Twitter stuff, right? So what do
Yeah.
you think was the most damaging aspect of this Twitter files?
Um, I think the most damaging thing was finding out about the system that the feds were able to just input requests, and then they would just take down tweets or ban people because of it. Um, I would say I would say it's that, and I think that's mainly that. I think it's mainly that. I think, especially in the very beginning, the early Twitter files, I think that stuff just confirmed what we all suspected, was that yes, they are shadow banning people. Yes, they are restricting stuff from trending. They have all these things. They have special things for certain accounts. And Elon confirmed nobody on the left had these things. It was always people who were on the right. So there was a political bias. We all figured that. It was just kind of like a confirmation of what we already knew. But like finding out that the conspiracy that the government is working with big tech to censor people was actually true. That I think that is the part that is kind of like, yeah, it's deeper than some some agent, some high-ranking agent knows Roth, Yoel Roth, and is just emailing him directly and saying, "Can you do X, Y, Z?" That's bad enough. But when they built an entire system for outside people who are part of the government, or even just part of the White House, or part of the campaign. I think some of the requests are coming from campaigns to say, take this down, do this, do that. And there were actually, I think, if I remember correctly, there were some requests that were coming from the right as well, but not nearly as not measurably enough the way it was kind of described. Um, but just the fact that anybody who's part of the government or part of a political campaign could be like, ban this person, take these tweets down, do this, do that. Um, to me, it was just uh, kind of shocking, not surprising, but
Yeah.
like, but it was just like, wow, they were really doing that. I will say, I did find it interesting how the higher ups, when it came to Hunter Biden's laptop, they were very they were questioning themselves. Like, does this seem right that they're doing this? Like, is this okay? It is the New York Post. Are we do? Is this the right thing?
Yeah, and
So,
and that's something I also noticed, which sort of made me much more sympathetic to the Twitter employees than
mhm,
before the files were released. Before the files were released, I thought they were just like ideologically possessed zombies who were just banning anything conservative. But they were actually having a conversation and a dialogue. Like, are we crossing the line here? I just think that they were genuinely good people who were misguided, right? They were trying to sort of actually do the right thing, because it wasn't like the Trump ban wasn't just a unilateral thing. They had
mhm,
this back and forth, this back and forth. Well, some were arguing where he hasn't actually crossed the line. Some said, okay, what if we reinterpret this to mean this? Maybe we can ban him on that regard. So it wasn't like a dictatorship where, oh no, Trump, we don't like him, is he has to be gone, right? There
mhm.
was It made me much more sympathetic to the struggles that they had to do what they did, right? I'm not saying it was right, but I saw that internal struggle with them. Like, these were
Yeah.
genuinely good people who were misguided.
So I will say this because I knew someone who worked at Twitter, um, prior to Elon buying it. Um, it big tech in general, based off talking to them, and finding out, and other companies, big tech in general is very ideological. Now, is everybody who works at Twitter, or at least let's say Twitter 1.0, was everybody who's there is hardcore leftist? No. And the person I was talking to is not that person. What ends up happening is it's kind of like 20% are strident and hardcore into that. They're in management, they're here and they're there. And that 20% is enough to make the 80% shut the hell up, to make the 80% fearful of, like, I have no idea if my manager's woke. Can I say these things? Because you saw what happened when someone did something or insinuated something, how everybody, or it seemed like everybody, but that loud 20% reacted to it. So, I it is ideological. It's more ideological than, let's say, the vast majority of any other field. Um, but I can understand in some respects where people are trying to decipher. But this is actually part of the problem. Twitter should have never gone down this route. And I think that's what the Twitter files kind of showed, that they were down a rabbit hole of censorship. They were getting a lot of activists who were yapping in their ear, you need to protect people, there's violence, blah, 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 hate speech, and all these things. And they're trying to appease everybody. And in some ways, you could say they're trying to appease the federal government, who's up their ass saying, you need to do this, you need to do that. And so, like, they're like, what are we going to do? All right, fine. Let's create this system so they can leave us alone and we just do whatever they tell us to do. So that could possibly not just be ideological. That, if the FBI is saying take this person down, or some campaign is saying take this person down, and they're just doing it, they're just doing it. Um, but I think they got down the moderation wormhole, and all these outside voices were just telling them what to do, and they're just abiding by it, and they're trying to satisfy everybody, and they're failing because you can't satisfy everybody. And then what ends up happening is, like, conservatives and people on the right, one, they don't have enough influence. Two, they don't know how to organize anyways. So they're not the ones who are knocking at their doors saying, "Hey, we need to do this." It's like one lone person who's saying something isn't right, something's not right. They can't ever get anything together. Meanwhile, we have all these NGOs, we have all these nonprofits, all these activist organizations that exist on the far left that have no problem marching down to San Francisco and demanding meetings with people, and they got their way. And you can't misgender, you can't do this, you can't do that. Um, Shadow ban these people. So I do think that they went down the moderation wormhole and they got stuck there, and I think it ended up biting them in the ass.
Hmm. So, final question. With all
Mhm.
these releases, this 15-part series release, do you think that this is a smoking gun or is this a fluff? Would it just, die down like many things usually die down?
I guess smoking gun to me kind of it means like there's a particular outcome that you want. So like if you want to ruin, I don't know, we used to say like smoking gun, if someone's uh, running for election and you find the smoking gun that messes up their election chances and then they don't get elected or something like that, but the intention was to discover something to ruin their election, like the Hunter Biden laptop could have been the smoking gun for Joe Biden to not get elected. So I don't know I don't know how to answer that because I don't know what the ultimate objective is. If the objective is just to scold Twitter or old Twitter about their actions and activity, then sure, we have the smoking gun because we have enough proof, all these emails, all these journalists who got their hands on everything to show that yeah, there were things that they were doing moderation wise that they shouldn't have been doing. Um, but will anything change? I highly doubt it. Will anything happen as far as the federal government's activities? They'll probably do some sort of hearing. It'll be public. They'll scold whoever, and then what? Like,
So, in essence, fluff.
yeah, I would say more fluff than smoking gun. Yeah, um, but I'll leave it to. It depends on what everyone's expectation is. If your expectation is that certain figures who were part of the FBI or the DOJ get fired because they were colluding and censoring people's voices, that's not going to happen. Um, I've kind of come to the conclusion that very powerful people, especially within government, rarely are rarely experience any sort of punishment. So we can have all the proof there. Guess what? Nothing's going to happen. And even if I was someone who was like anti-Trump and I wanted January 6th to be the thing that put him in jail for whatever reason, that wasn't going to happen either. It's that fever dream that everybody's being sold. But like, yeah, I've just kind of come to the conclusion: very wealthy, very connected, very powerful people within our country have enough means to avoid accountability.
Hmm, true. Well, Adam B. Coleman, thank you very much for this conversation. I knew you have to run off to something else. So this is about an hour, 3 minutes of fruitful conversation on the Twitter files. I've
Yep.
had have had the pleasure of talking with you. So Adam B. Coleman writes on Substack, wrongspeak.net, right?
Yep.
Um,
They can go to
yeah,
wrong speak. Yep.
you can go to wrongspeak.net. It has a lot of articles, very, very, very good articles. It features writers too, and I featured one of my article 2 days ago on how race obscures the problem with policing. So you can go check that out. And
Mhm.
he also featured one on chaos agents. You wrote that one, right?
Yeah,
Chaos agents.
that's on my personal Substack.
Yeah. So, guys, please go over to Adam B. Coleman's Substack, follow him on Twitter. You can go to over to my Substack too as well. Critical African Thinkers on Substack, all right, on Substack and on Twitter as well. So, thank you very much for joining this conversation today. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with Adam, and I believe that he would indulge us again whenever we need to have these kinds of conversations. and he'll come around. So Adam, thank you for showing up. We really, really do appreciate.
No problem.
Yeah. So it's bye for now.
Peace.